Hi guys, welcome to Digital TechJoint. In this tutorial, we are going to learn about the two hosting models provided by Blazor. We are also going to learn how to work with classes in Blazor, define variables, and many other things that will help you to get started with developing Blazor full stack web application in .NET. So let's get started. So we are going to first look at the overview of Blazor Server App architect. If you look at Blazor Server App, totally is a server-side application where components are rendered on the client from the server, and this is done using SignalR. Now, whenever you are working with Blazor Server App, there is a component called SignalR, which is provided by .NET, which becomes a bridge between your server and the client. So we will see how we can use the Blazor Server App while we do the hands-on session. But for now, look at this architect which is there, where we have a server-side component on the left-hand side where we have the .NET Core Blazor framework and then .NET runtimes. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have the client, which is, and the handshake between these two is happening through a SignalR. Now we'll go ahead and see what are the pros and cons of a server app. So in the Blazor Server App, there's no need of JavaScript. Small size of files are downloaded in the client side. You can use the .NET capabilities. That means you don't need to learn JavaScript in order to create a full stack web application. Debugging becomes easy when you're using a Blazor Server App. It supports almost all the browsers. Your code remains on the server and doesn't go at the client side, doesn't get exposed to the client side. And then there's definitely cons to it, like you need a server edition for scaling your application. Then there is no offline support provided for Blazor Server App because it is directly connected to the server. And obviously there is a latency. There can be a latency issue if you have not done your coding in an optimized and thought through process. So these were the different pros and cons for server app. Now getting back to our Blazor WebAssembly. So Blazor WebAssembly provided by Blazor framework enables you to develop client-side application. What it does is that whenever you talk about client-side, we think about JavaScript and Angular and React. So these are the frameworks that give the capability to develop a component-based application, whereas develop the client-side application so that they can leverage and create a rich and interactive client-side application, web application. However, Blazor comes with WebAssembly, which is a standard runtime used by all the browsers. So what it does is that using the .NET capability, you can still go ahead and create a totally full stack web application without the knowledge of JavaScript. So you can leverage your cSharp, Razor and HTML code languages, and then you can create it, and that capability is provided by Blazor WebAssembly. If you look at in Blazor WebAssembly, what happens when you run the application, all the important runtimes, .NET runtimes, is downloaded on the client side, and then along with that runtime it also downloads your DLLs and code, and then it provides the capability to use client side coding and create a very rich and interactive application. Now let us look at the pros and cons for a WebAssembly. You still don't need a JavaScript knowledge to create a client WebAssembly application. There is an offline support provided. So once your logics and codes get downloaded on the client side, you can still go ahead and give the capability for the client to work on certain functionality where you can provide an offline support. That's one of the fantastic feature for Blazor WebAssembly. Then obviously, as I mentioned, it's a rich client-side capability, so there is no server round trips, so it's reduced latency, almost no latency. Then what is the cons? The con is that, as I mentioned, all the .NET runtimes and DLLs needs to be downloaded at the client side. A significant little amount of time is required to download depending upon your DLL size and your functionality. Then obviously there's a use of WebAssembly. Now WebAssembly is a standard library that is supported by most of the browser, but however there could be some browser which does not support this WebAssembly, so your application will not work properly in those browsers. Then debugging obviously is difficult. Always at the client side you have to use the browser debugging tools and then troubleshoot it. However, while I'm recording this, there are fair chances that Microsoft will come with some capability to debug at the client side. so it becomes easy for the developer to debug any issues. Then obviously your DLLs gets downloaded at the client side, and unless until you have a secure mechanism, it can be downloaded and exposed by and your code can be at a risk. So these are the cons from a Blazor WebAssembly. Now coming back to our section, that in this tutorial what are we going to do. So basically we are going to walk through the project structure of Blazor Server and WebAssembly. We had done this in the previous video which we had launched for Blazor, but we are going to do a little detailed analysis this time. Then we are going to work with variables. We are going to declare variables, how to bind values to variable, display variables. We are going to use certain functions. Then we are going to work with classes. We are going to use model class and see how can we refer the model class and work with that. Then we are going to use basic syntax, like we are going to use looping, fetching data, displaying data from the class objects. Then obviously we are going to create Razor components. We are going to show you how do you route between Razor component with simple routing as well as parameterized routing. And finally we'll create a small form using and bind it with a model class and show how to use validation. So these topics will help you not only understand which model you need to select before you start developing your Blazor application, but this tutorial will also help you to get started with certain techniques and understanding, so that you can go further, and then basis this video you can go ahead and create much advanced Blazor application. So guys, let's go ahead to the hands-on session now. So I've opened my Visual Studio 2022. I click on create new project, and now I'll search for Blazor. So you will get two project template. You see there is Blazor Server App as well as there is a Blazor WebAssembly App. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a blank solution and add both this template in my project. So this is Blazor demo. I click on create. So now I right click on the solution, click add and say new project, and here I'm going to select Blazor server first. So this will be my Blazor server app. I click on create. I select .NET 6.0 as a framework, and then I click on the create. So this in the solution, this project. So this is my first Blazor server app added. Let's go ahead and also add the Blazor client app. So here this Blazor WebAssembly. So we select that and click on next. Now I'm going to say Blazor WebAssembly, or I'll say Blazor client app, and click on create. So now you can see the solution which I created contains two projects. Now both the projects are there. There is a Blazor server app which is by default selected, which is there in the startup, and then there is a Blazor client app. Now if you look at closely, I'll just expand this and I'll expand this structure. If you look at the structure is similar. We have the pages in the client as well as in the server app. We have a shared folder in the client as well as in the server app. We have program files in the server as well as in the client app. We have a Razor configuration routing files in the Blazor server app as well as in the client app. Okay, so now we don't have app settings. So app settings is there in the server. Obviously, as I mentioned, this contains all the parameter and the queries. Sorry, the parameters and the values that you set to the server side, which is rendered at the client side. But at the client side, we don't have app settings, and this is the difference. Now here, if you look at, let us go ahead first. Now let's run this. So right now I have right click. It's a Blazor server app which is selected. So I'll just run this application and see what is the output and what is the difference in the output. Let's see the output difference. So the Blazor server app is loaded. This is a landing page. We have an home, which is an home page over here. This is the default page that is displayed. Then we have a counter module which increments the count, and then we have fetch data, which actually is a fetching data from the file itself, not from the database. And this was explained in my previous video. You can check my previous video, which will be displayed which will be there in the link, will be there in the description. So we will not get into the description of detailing of this. This is the output of a Blazor Server App. Now let's go ahead and run the same for a Blazor Client App. So in order to run the Blazor Client App, I right click on the Blazor Client solution and then I select Startup. So there is an option set as startup project. Now this becomes bold, the solution, and let's run and see what is the output displayed by Blazor WebAssembly App. Yes, this is the output of the Blazor WebAssembly. You see the output is exactly the same. There's no difference. You can see the fetch data, you can see the counter which increments the count, and then we can see the home page with the option to display the to click on the survey form. So there's no difference in the output. Now let us go and see each and examine each and every file. So on the Blazor Server App, we'll go to the program.cs, and you can see this program.cs is an entry point of the application. Whenever application initiated to run, this file is called and it checks all the settings and capabilities, and it also checks what all options needs to be included for this project. Here if you see, we have the service add razor pages and add server side Blazor, and then this is a weather forecast class which they have injected over here, which is a part of the pages, that is weather, where we can fetch the weather forecast data, which is offline fetched, which is fetched from the data, and that data comes from over here where they have added some default values over here which is displayed. So this is how the program file looks like for the server app. This is all was there in MVC application, also in ASP.NET Core also. This is the addition of services that required for the application. Now look at the references. We have ASP.NET Core component and component.web. Now let us go to Blazor WebAssembly and click on programs. Here you can see we have something called root component add app. This is basically the client side app, that is a browser, and then we have a pipeline of HTTP base URL and addresses, and then obviously we have the run command which is there in the server app also. But unlike the server, here we have very few entries. As I mentioned, a lot of server components will not be included in WebAssembly, so that is how we have this limited scope. Then we have something called shared in the server app, and we have the main layout and the menu bar and everything. This is a sample component that is developed and included. We'll learn about the components in further sections. Now this is a shared file, and if you see on the client side, we have the same main menu. Obviously the output is the same, that means it also has a main layout for a component and then nav bars. Then we have pages. So on the server side, we have the following pages. We have counter and fetch data index, and we also have underscore rows layout. Whereas on the client side, we have the index, the fetch data, and the counter. We don't have the underscore host and layout because the routing is happening at the client side. So these are the only main differences of a Blazor WebAssembly and the Blazor Server App. But one thing, as I explained in my presentation, is important, is that before you select anyone for your development platform, understand what exactly is your requirement. If you have a requirement where you have most of the logics and rendering written at the server side, and then definitely you need to go with the Blazor Server App. Whereas for WebAssembly, if you need to build offline capability, and if you have most of the logic at the client side and you want to make something very interactive at the browser end, then definitely go with the WebAssembly. Also, second important thing is to note before you select the hosting platform on a Blazor WebAssembly, when you run the application, all your required DLLs runtimes are getting downloaded at the client side. So there is some amount of time required to download those files on the browser. So that is the second point, important point to note. And the third point is that whatever platform you select, the code that is written will work in both the hosting models. So if you write any code on a server app, Blazor Server App, that can be used in Blazor WebAssembly App also. Vice versa, if you write something in the WebAssembly code, that can be used on your Blazor Server App also. So now let us go ahead and see how many files gets downloaded when you run the Blazor server as well as the Blazor WebAssembly app. So I've set the Blazor server app as a startup and I'm going to run this project right now. And then we are going to click on F12 and see the what all files get downloaded. So I click on F12 and then I go to network, and you can see very minimum amount of files gets downloaded for the Blazor server app. I'll just refresh once again. Okay, so here is the files that gets downloaded for the Blazor server app, and the most important file here to be noted is a SignalR file, which actually does which is a mediator between the browser as well as the client app. So that is very important to note. So rest all is a basic HTML and the CSS that gets downloaded for the browser, bootstrap and everything. So here you can see all the files gets downloaded, and this is the important file Blazor server.js, which is a SignalR JavaScript that actually, as I showed in my diagram in the presentation, which acts as an intermediate and does a handshake between the server and the client. So these are the files gets downloaded to the server. Now let's go ahead and run the client app. So we click on Blazor WebAssembly App, we set as startup project, and we run the application. Okay, so I click on F12 now, the developers tool of the browser, Chrome browser, and then I click on network. I'll just refresh it once again, and here you can see the files that are getting downloaded for the Blazor WebAssembly, and this is the important file Blazor WebAssembly.js that actually downloads, and it will also download certain DLLs. Right now our project does not have any DLL class or something, otherwise it could have downloaded those files also. So this gets downloaded on the client side along with .NET runtimes so that it can work offline also. So these are the two differences that we have shown you and highlighted for the Blazor. Now for the demo purpose and for the rest of the topics on working with classes library, I'm going to use a Blazor WebAssembly and for the entire project. So we will just unload this Blazor server app from here, unload project, and then we are going to remove this. So now our solution has only Blazor WebAssembly app. So now let's get started with the other getting started with how do we define Blazor components and everything. So we will cover a lot of topics during this section. Okay, so we'll start with creating our first Blazor component. So the under the pages folder we have counter, fetch data, and index. So what we are going to do is that we're going to start with creating our first Blazor component. So right click on pages and say add Blazor component. Make sure while you create a Blazor component, your first the name of the first Blazor component should be always start with capital. So here I say my first component. So in my M is capital, that's important. So you see when my Blazor component is created, we can see that it's created in title, and then this is the code section. So there's the two parts to it. So one, here we define the Blazor code for our coding, and here this is the code behind. In a single file we can write both the codes. So here let me go ahead and just run this application and call this. In order to call this on my browser, I need to give it a name. So I say @page and slash and say my first component or my first Blazor page. Okay, so this is the name I defined to this my Blazor component. Now you must be wondering what is this that I've defined over here, my first component, and then I'm saying my first Blazor page. That all depends what do you want this component to be called. So I can go ahead and call this as digital tech join 2. But as a good programming practice, when you define your component as my first razor component, then it is ideal that you go ahead and write the same name, but make sure that you define it in a small letters. So my first component, this is my name of the component. Now I'll just run the application, and then I'll tell you how do you call this in the browser. So my page is loaded. By default it is showing the index. I just write on the browser address, I say slash, and I type the name my first component and click on enter, and you see my component is loaded. So let's do some modification. So I'm going to say my first razor page, and I just refresh it. So you see it gets my first razor page. Also, if I don't want to type that URL over here, then I can add that link over here. In order to add the link over here, what I do, I go to my shared folder menu bar, and then you can see the 3 links over there. I just copy the last link over here, I paste it, and then I say, so this is the name of the component. I just copy this and I paste it over here, and I give the first razor component. I run my application. Now you can see the menu is added over here. I click on my first razor component and I see the page is loaded. So we learned about creating razor component, and then we learned about referring that, adding a menu. Now let's go ahead, click on our component, and let's work with variables now. So in order to, let's do one thing. Let's declare a variable saying string title, and I'm going to say I'm going to give a value to it. Welcome to Razor tutorial. Sorry, Blazor tutorial. And actually it is not Razor, it's Blazor. Okay, so this is my way I declare the variable. And then if I want to print this variable over here, so what I'm going to do is that I will say displaying the variable value. Okay, and then I'm going to say, in order to display the value, I say @title. Let's run this application now. See, I click on the my first, you can see displaying the variable value welcome to Blazor tutorial. Okay, so this is how you declare your Blazor. Now let us use some function also, just in case if I want to use some functions and I want to make sure that all this text that is displayed should be displayed in capital. For that I just have to use one function called dot to upper, and click on run the application. So these are very basic things, but I just want to get you to know this so that you can get started with developing real world applications. So you click on first user, you can see it is the function is working and we are able to see. Now we can also do some additions, like you can use some arithmetic operations as well. So let me just tell you, for example, if I want to do some addition, say let's add 100 plus 500 equals to, and in order to calculate this I say @ and I put a bracket, and then I say 100 plus 500, and this should display me the value. I just save it and refresh it. You see the value is displayed. Now let's go ahead and add the click event, which is most important. So let's go ahead and see how does the click event work. So let me create a method, void method, so which will say void write to log. Okay, and I'm going to say console dot write line you clicked me, so something like that. Now I want this method to be called when I click on the button. So first thing I need to add a button. So let me just say click event. Now let me add a button over here, and I say button. Okay, so at the rate on click event. So these are the all events that we will learn for in our further video tutorials. So this is right now on click, and then we are going to call write to log. Okay, so this is the method I'm going to call, and then I'm going to say click me. Let's run the application and also open a console. Okay, so I click on the razor, and this is a button which I've displayed over here, and click on F2N, click on console. Now I'm going to click on this button. You can see it is showing you clicked me. So now this is how we created a click event. Now let's work with classes. So what we'll do is that we'll create one more component and name it as student. Okay, so this is a component. We are going to name it as page slash student. Okay, so this is our component. Now here we define some class. So we say public class students, and we are going to define a variable from that string name, and then just we are going to copy this. This will be mobile, and this will be email. So this is a class. So we could have defined this class we could have created a folder and created the class over there. We'll do that. For now, just for a demo, I'm going to just create now, because here we are just showing you how to work with class. So I define the class. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to set some values for this class and then use it in the razor code. So how do we do that? So what we are going to do is that we're going to initialize that over here. We're going to say students underscore student, and I'm going to set some values. Name is James, mobile and email. Okay, so I've initialized this. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to print these values in the razor code above and display it on the razor component. So for that, what I'm going to do is declare that variable. So I'm going to say the display student details, and simply I'm going to refer it name bold and @ student. This is the variable that I declared, and I'm going to say name to upper. Copy that for mobile and email. I don't need to upper for mobile as well as email. Mobile and email. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the application. So just right click and call the student component, and here you can see the name is displayed. I declared the class and displayed. Now let us enhance this. Instead of setting single value, let's initialize this for multiple values and then learn on how do we loop the classes and display that over here. So let's go ahead and do that. In order to initialize multiple values, what I'm going to do is that in the event provided or initialized, I'm going to initialize these values. So what I'm going to do is protected override, and once you click on override, just space, you say on initialized. So this will be called when the component is initialized, and I'm going to say, I'm going to comment this line because I don't want the value to be, and here I'm going to say _students. So here I just declare that because it's a list value, I'm going to say students _students. Okay, and now here I'm going to say _students equals to new list and set some values. So here I've set three students values. So in the list I've declared three students, Alex, William and John, and I assigned it values of name, mobile and email. So when on initialize, this will be initialized, this variable will be set. Now what we are going to do is that we will be looping through this list object and display that value. So for that, what we'll do is display students, let this be over here, and we are going to say @ for each where student in _students. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this inside and paste it. Okay, and instead of, we refer this variable, we'll put a breakpoint inside this, and obviously one horizontal line also. So now let's go ahead and run this application. I'm calling the student component, and we will see we're able to display student details, that is Alex, William and John. So here we work with the classes. We declared a class, then we said use the on initialized method of the code behind file, and then we set the values in list object and we displayed it. So in the next session, now here we are going to learn about calling razor component in another razor component. As I mentioned in my presentation, Blazor is come up giving the facility for .NET developers to develop a full stack web application similar to Angular and React framework. So Angular and React framework works on the component based logic and framework. So this is how I'll show you. So I showed you how to create component. Now I'm going to show you how to call the component inside another component and also pass variable. So let me create two components just to show this concept. So I call this the first component. So I say first, and then I create one more component called second. So these are the two components I declared. Let me name them. So I click on first and page @/first. I go to the second component. I click on second. So these two components are ready. Let me go and just no, it's okay, we will not add any references to the menu, we will directly call them. So now my first component is ready, so I just going to name this is my first component. I want to call this component in second, so here I want to call them. So we just simply need to do is that mention first, my first, just first over here, and then this is how calling the first component. Okay, so here in my second, so if you look at my, just run this application and I'll call the second component, and I should be able to see the message that I written in the first component. I just call the, so this is my first component. Okay, so this is my first component. Now I'm calling the second component. And here you can see this is my second component calling the first. This is my first component. So this is how you need to call components within another component, Blazor component. Now if I want to pass a parameter while calling the first component, then how do I do that? So I go to the Blazor component, first component. So in my first component, I remove this line and just say h2. I just say first component so that we are. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to declare a variable with parameter and public string title name. Okay, so this is defined as parameter, that is expecting a parameter. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to display a message, my name is, and I'm going to use @title name. So this becomes dynamic. Now when you are calling the first component in your second component, then you'll have to also pass in the parameter. So what I'm going to do is first component, and now I'm going to refer the title names. You can see that it is already, the variable is declared while I'm declaring the first component, and I'm going to put my name as Alex. Now if I run the application and call the second component, that is the second Blazor component, it will display the name Alex. My name is Alex. So this is how you can pass parameters into component, and this is a very basic step I'm showing you just for a better understanding and foundation. But in real world, we write components which displays values and information or alerts or something, which is actually called in another component. So think about a page like Twitter, which has many components and each component is doing its own activity. So that level of functionality can be achieved using this Blazor component structure and using routing, which I just showed to you. Sorry, I did not show you routing, but I showed you how to call a component within another component. I'm going to show you routing. Now, for instance, I want to do navigation from first page to second. How do I do that? So let's do that. So here I showed you in my menu bar, I have added the link directly and I named it as the component name. But what if I want to programmatically move redirect from one component to another? That we'll see. So let's go ahead and use the same first and the second components. So we will navigate between the first and the second component. So I will for navigating, so from the first component I want to navigate to the second component. How do I do that? Okay, for that we need to inject a navigation manager in our code. Let's say at the rate inject navigation manager, and we declare a variable. I say nav manage mgr manager. Now I create a method. So I'm going to say protected go to second component Blazor component. Okay, and here I'm going to use the variable declared nav manager dot navigate slash second. I'll create a button at the on click. Now I'm going to just copy this method over there. So this is created. Now I'm going to just run this application. And I'm going to call the first component. Now you can see there's a button go to second component. The moment I click on the second component, it is redirected to the second component. So this is how the redirection happens. We can quickly just show this the same thing. So I just copy this, inject in the second component. So this is the second component over here, and from the first I'm going to copy this code so that we can move back to the first component, and I just name it to first. I copy the click event, I call the first component, and then I navigate to the second component, and from the second component I go back to the first component. So this is how I showed you how the navigation and routing works. But there's one more thing I want to show is that if I want to pass certain values while I'm doing a routing or navigating from first component to second, how do I do that? So let's do that, assuming the second component as a variable, as a parameter, and from the first component I need to pass that can be displayed in the second component. How do I do that? So let's go ahead and see that. So let's do one thing. For now, remove all these things so that there's no confusion, and we just keep the button, and in the second component also let's remove calling the first component and keep the navigation button. So we go to the second component, and here what we'll do is that we will declare a variable. So inside the code block we are going to define parameter some text. So let's say some text, and what we are going to do is that we are going to create a method. So we are going to say protected override on initialized, and we are going to print some text. So this variable we are going to call it over here. So we declared a variable which is a parameter based, and once the component gets loaded, the second component, then we will display that in the console. Now we need to make sure that whenever the second component, that is this component, is called from the first, we pass this variable. So how do we do that? So what we are going to do is that we will go to the first component. Okay, but before we go to the first component, we will also enable, so in your second.razor component, we have named this as second. So we are going to provide one more capability and tell that this component is also expecting some text URL. So if you don't pass it, it will still call, but if you pass it, it will pick up that some text, and when the component is initialized, it will print in the console. Now let's do this. So I have set up this second component to receive some values. So in your first component, when I'm doing a navigation, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add some text to it. So what I'm going to do is, let me do one thing. Let me create a form type so that user can put some value. So I'm going to say input type text, ID is value. Okay, and one thing, before I declare this, I need to declare a variable. So I'm going to say parameter, okay, sorry, not a parameter, but it will be prop string value. Okay, so this is a variable, and then I go to here and say input type text, input type text, ID is value, and then I'm going to bind it. So in order to bind it, so I'm going to bind at the rate value. Okay, so what I've done is I declare a variable called value, then I declare an input type, that is text box, which has an ID value, and then I'm going to bind. So at the rate bind is bind with this value over there. So whatever user types in, that value will be in the text box, that is will be initialized and set in this variable. And when I move to the second component, okay, this time when I move to second component, I'm going to say slash, and I'm going to append the value variable. Remember, in my second razor component, I have accepted this navigation routing when I'm expecting some text over here. So let's go ahead and see things in action. So I'm going to click on first. I'm going to press F12. You can see a text box and go to menu, and this is my console. So here I'm going to say the name, and I'll click on the second component, and you can see it is getting printed over here, and it is also moved to the second component. So in this part I've explained how do you do routing, but here I've shown you how do you do routing with passing a parameter to the second component. Now the last part of the section is to create a form. We are going to create a class called students class in a folder, model folder, and then we are going to create a basic validation form and end this session. So let's check on that. Okay, so first let's right click on the solution, that is B client app, that is WebAssembly app, and create a folder, name it as model, and then right click on that and create a class called student entity. I have just copied this property. I'm just going to paste it. So we have defined a client ID, we have defined name which is required, and date of birth. Okay, so these three components, we are going to create a form. So what we're going to do is right click on the pages and say raise a component and say student form. Okay, and this is student details, and I'm going to name this as page slash student form. I'm also going to go this time to the nav bar and just add a reference, or I'll remove this first, or just add this might as well, and just say student form. Okay, so this is a form ready. So this is student form. Let's go ahead. First I'm going to do is that we need to refer our model class. So I'm going to say @using bclientapp.model. So this is my reference. Now here I'm going to create the form. So first thing is I'm going to say, let me just go ahead and create certain methods first, or let me just create the form for you. So we say edit form and model. Now my model is my student entity. Okay, and it should be the variable declared. So st details, this is my student entities that will be declaring below, and this is my form tag. But before, why this is showing error is because I need to declare that student entity below, which I have not done yet. So let me do that first. So I say private student entity and s details equals new student. Okay, so now the error is gone. Now here I'm going to create a form. I'm going to say div class group. Okay, and then I'm going to say label student name, input type, input text, okay, so it says input type text, and then class will be form control, and now I'm going to say bind value and this will be stdetails.name. Okay, so I'm getting some error activity because bind value v is capital. Let me go and check my class entity's name string, which is right. Should be input text. Yeah, got it. So here it was so input text. Yes, it's input text. Yeah, it is an input text because it's a text value, text box value, and then we are binding the bind value and the class and the name. Okay, so this is one. Now what we are going to do is that you just copy that and paste it for date of birth. So we have two components, right? It's name and date of birth. Okay, fine. So we just take name and it's a date of birth. So this time input text. It's not text, it's input date. Okay, and then here this is date of birth. So this is a form. Now we will add a submit button. Button class btn success. This is a bootstrap class and type is submit and then save details. Okay. Now let's run this application. We will not submit it because we are going to add validations to it, but we'll see a first Blazor form. I click on student details and you can see our form is ready, and you can see the calendar is also displayed, and we can see a button. We will just add a fine. Great. So this is done. Now let's go ahead and add validation, because when you click on save, nothing happens. So what we'll do is that we'll create a method. You can say private void create student, and here we want to say console dot writeline st details. Okay, and just we'll print the name for now. Okay, for now we'll just print the name. And we have not added any validation, so we'll see how do we add validations also. Yes, so click on student and we click F12 console, and then we just enter some dates and click on submit. So there's nothing happening. Why there's nothing happening? Because we have not bind this event over there. So basically we have not bind create student event on submission. So for that, what you need to do is that in your edit form model, you have specified the class, and here you need to also specify what happens. So on valid submit, and you call the class. Let's refresh it. So I click on console this time, I enter my select the date and I click on submit. You see it displays over here. But what happens if I don't enter anything and click on it? See, the blank values are getting printed. So how do I restrict that? In order to do that, let's go to our entity class and see that we have already added a tag required, and this is required for both the sections, for name as well as date of birth. But still it is allowing. Why? Because we didn't add the helper class called the data annotation validator. So let's do that. Click edit form model, and below that just enter data annotation validator. Now we have done that. Okay, and then here you have to add the validation also. So we click on below the name, input text name, and say validation message for @ and lambda expression, and say sDetails dot name. So we have added this validation. Now let's go ahead and run the application again. Okay, so there is an error. Sorry, this is So let's click on student details. Now we click on F12 and see what happens. So I click on save button and you can see there is a red mark showing and it is not even printing. So if I just enter that, still it is not printing because there is a required tag for date and now it is printing. So let me go ahead and just make that change there. So this is right above this. So we just marked required as name and we'll run the application and see. We click on students. Now we press F12 and we try to click on save. You see it is red mark is displayed saying the name field is required, and it is not printing in my console also. But I want to display a custom field, so what I'm going to do is that required, and I'm going to say error message. Please enter student name. It's required. And manage it too. So this is my custom message. Now this will be automatically picked up by the data annotation validator. Click on student details. Now we click on save. No, we can see please enter student details required. We click on F12 and enter and the date, and here you can see it is now printing. So guys, I explained you the core concept of selecting Blazor web app and the WebAssembly platform. Also walk through certain routing principles and how do you pass do routing and pass parameters, declaring variables and working with classes, and finally creating a simple form with validations. In my first Blazor session, that is in my channel, which I created for you guys, if you go to the playlist and here is my channel and you can see on Blazor. So this is the first video that I created, introduction to Blazor, ASP.NET Blazor, where I explain the core concept of what does Blazor do and explain the project structure. In my second video that I am going to release now and which will be available in the channel, where I explain all these topics. I hope you like the video. Please do subscribe my channel and like all my videos. Share my channel link with your friends, students, colleagues, and help us to grow this channel so that it reaches this knowledge reaches to most of the developers and they can learn something new and excel in their career. Thank you so much for your time.